Hello, this is Mrs. Ringrose, and we are back at it again with solving systems. We already reviewed what a system is, and we learned a little bit about how to find the answer. We're going to continue building our steps so that we can do the whole solution on our own. But after this lesson, you should be able to find the solution to the system of linear equations by graphing them using the graphing method. So the first thing I just want to review is that a system of equations is two or more equations. And your job is to find the answer that works for both of them. And in Algebra 1, we're just worried about linear equations. And we're only going to work on two of them at a time, but systems do exist where you have more than two. So the point of intersection is where the lines cross, and we're interested in that point because this is our answer. So all the points on one line is an answer to the first line, and all the points on the other line is an answer to the second equation. And that point where they cross or overlap is the answer that works for both of them, and that's the one that we're always interested in. So that's why we are learning how to graph two equations together so we can find that answer. And you might be asking, well, where do the equations come from? And they come from real life problems, so sometimes you make your equations yourself. Okay, and then we talked about the steps to solve a system using the graphing method. So again, today's focus, or this lesson's focus, is only the graphing method. There are two other methods that we are going to work on before the end of the year. So step one is to put the equation into a form that you can graph easily. So maybe y equals mx plus b, but if you like using intercept method and the equations in standard form, you can do that as well. Step two, which is what we're going to work on today, is graph both equations on the same grid, right? Because if they're not in the same place, then we can't see where they cross. Step three is find the answer. All right, that's the point of intersection. Right, that's where their answer is. And four is to check your work. I can't stress step number 4 enough. You have the tools to check your own answer by putting it back in. There's so many places where you can make a mistake with this. Step 1, you could accidentally forget a negative or add wrong when you change the equation. Step 2, you could have easily graphed a positive slope when in fact it should be decreasing. Step 3, when you find the point, it's easy to switch the numbers by accident and put y first. Because remember, your answer is always going to be x comma y because we're looking for an ordered pair. And then, so really, I can't tell you enough to make sure you're doing step 4. And, if you're using the calculator to help you out, it should be a really quick, 5-second check. So our first example, we're going to graph y equals 3x plus 5, and we're going to graph y equals negative 2x, and we're going to find the answer to that system. So step 1 is done, because step 1 is to put it into y equals mx plus b. Step 2 is we're going to graph. So I still like to write out what my m and my b are. So for my first line, my m is 3 over 1, and my b is 5. So that means I'm going to go up to 5 and put a point in my y-intercept, and then I'm going to go up 3 and over 1. All right, so if you're used to just graphing like this and drawing a line, you would have gotten it right if you're just doing one line. However, I don't know if my answer is somewhere way back here. So I'm going to go ahead and graph backwards also to get a really good picture of where this line falls. So I'm going back to the beginning at 5, and now I'm going to go down 3 and backwards 1. 2, 3 over 1, 3 over 1. All right, awesome. And then you're going to take your ruler and draw a nice straight line, straighter than mine because I don't have a ruler. And then we're going to go ahead and graph the second line. So on this one, my m is negative 2 over 1 because that's the line, the number that's on my x, the coefficient of x. That's a negative slope, so my line should be decreasing. So I'm going to put an arrow there to remind myself I got to go down 2. And there's no number for b, so that means b is 0. So I'm going to put a point on 0, 0. And I'm going to go down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. So this is my second line. So I'm not going to be as, I'm not going to go all the way down, be as extra as my first line. I know if I keep going down, I'm not going to connect. So at this point, I'm going to go back to my beginning and go backwards, which would mean I go up 2 and backwards 1, up 2, backwards 1, up 2, backwards 1. And I can see where my lines are going to cross. So I'm going to grab my ruler and draw my line. And look at how amazing my lines are. And then, so step 2 is now done. Step 3 is find the solution. So the solution, again, is where the lines cross. So it looks like it's right there. So remember, the solution is an ordered pair. That point is at negative 1 for x, and then up 2 for y. So that should be the answer to that solution. That should be the solution to that system. Our next job is to check that the answer is right. So this is where I like to write both the equations and then plug in those numbers, negative 1 and 2, to see if it's right. So my first one looks like this. 2 goes in for y, and in for x is negative 1. And so that means 2 equals negative 3 plus 5. And I know negative 3 plus 5 is going to be a positive number because 5 is bigger and it's 2. So I can say that this point works for that equation. Next, I'm going to check to see if it works for the other one. So I'm going to plug 2 in for y again. And negative 1 gets plugged in for x. So the question is, does 2 equal whatever negative 2 times negative 1 is? And negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. So that's also a check. So I've successfully found the intersection, and I checked to see that the point I found is correct. So I know that this is my answer. All right, next example. And if you need to slow me down and rewatch it, go for it. In the next example, I have y equals x plus 2 and y equals negative 5 over 3x minus 6. Step 1 is done because there are only y equals mx plus b. Step 2 is graph. So my first one, my m is 1 over 1 and my b is 2. So I am going to start on 2, go up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. And again, I don't know where my answer is. So I'm just going to go and make sure that I am filling in all of the whole number of points on this line so that I get a really good picture. Next, my slope is decreasing. I go down and over. My b is also negative, so I want to make sure I start on negative 6. And I'm supposed to go down 5 and over 3, which would kind of put me off of the graph a little bit. So I'm going to go backwards, which means I'm going to go up 5 and backwards 3. Oh, looks like I already got my answer. Great. So then I'm going to grab my ruler and draw a nice line. So graphing is done. My next job is to locate where they intersect. That's the solution. And it looks like this is where they intersect. And that looks like I went backwards 3 in the x direction and then down 1 in the y direction. So my answer should be -3, -1. And my last thing I need to do is prove that -3, -1 is in fact the answer. So I'm going to write my equations. What is that? X plus 2 and y equals -5 over 3x minus 6. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time with the first one. I put -1 in for y, -3 in for x. You can add those together and that's correct. What I wanted to do was spend a little time with the fraction just to make sure you're confident with checking those off. The y is -1, right? So that goes in there. And my x is -3. So what's going to happen is in the calculator, I'm going to put -5 divided by 3 times -3. Or you may notice that because there's a 3 on top and a 3 on the bottom, they cancel. And you're left with +5. The 3's cancel. So 5 minus 6, so 6 is bigger, so it's going to be a negative number. And 5 minus 6 is -1. Right, so don't be afraid of the fraction. We have calculators. You just then plug it right in like we've been doing. And that's the only examples I have for you today. So good luck on graphing your equations and finding the solution. Hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions in class, as always, please ask me. Thank you.